Okay, we are going to part 3 here of offset lithography printing essentials. We last left off with talking about screens for offset printing. We had halftone screens here and dot gain. So we're going to talk a little bit more about screens. And first is that there's another type of screening called FM, or stochastic screening. Now if you remember, halftone screening, the dots were similar to what we see here on the right, where all of the dots were on a grid, spaced out equally, and then the size of the dots would change. Well, there's another type of screening called FM stochastic screening, which is where all the dots are the same size, but then they just clump more of them together, and there's no grid pattern, they're just spaced around to create the density or darkness that is necessary for that part of the image. So this is a completely different type of screening that you'll see on digital presses mainly, and photocopiers and so on. Where halftone screens you'll see on offset lithography, gravure, flexography. Although flexography could use stochastic screening too, so there is some overlap and changing of technologies. Generally, offset lithography will use traditional halftone screens. These are called halftones, where digital printing will use stochastic screening at times. Definitely photocopying uses stochastic screening. With halftone screens, not all of the dots are round. They can be diamond or square or linear. But the other thing to keep in mind is the number of rows in the screen. So there's what's called line screen, which is LPI, lines per inch. So in these rows of the halftone dots, there's, here we could say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rows of dots going across here. So we'd say, and if that was 1 inch, we'd say that'd be 9 lines per inch. So that's pretty coarse, pretty rough. You'd see those dots. When we're looking at screen printing, it's around 45 to 60 lines per inch in the screens that they will use. Newspaper printing, they put more lines in an inch. They do about 85. And then when you get up to offset presses, they're 133 to 200. Mainly nowadays, they're about 175 to 200 is the standard. So there's much more, much smaller dots, many more lines per inch, which gives us sharper images, crisper text, higher quality printing with the more lines per inch. Now this is different than pixels per inch, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes here. Here you can see the difference between a halftone dot on the bottom and stochastic FM screening on the top. Okay, if we have, I'm going to be focusing, the text is the same on the left. I have just different images on the right here. So as we had talked about, screen angles, the reason they do that is if they put all the dots in a 90-degree pattern, our eyes easily make up different illusions that come out of there. So they angle the screens to create this rosette type pattern, looks like circles. And our eye has a fine time just blending those together where we don't discern any sort of pattern. So a rosette is good. However, if the angles are off, then we come up with a moire pattern, and you'll be looking and researching these on your own. So moire patterns make our eyes find these weird illusions in the printing. You can sort of see one there, but I'm sure when you search online you will find many of them. You can see some here. Sometimes the moire patterns, if there's a pattern in the image and then the dots conflict with the pattern in the image, it can create a moire even if the screen angles are set correctly. So we're just going to zoom in a little closer here, and it's just more examples of looking at a photograph and then changing it to halftone dots. How that is the way it is done, and I really expect you to learn that. So here is an example of just a gradient, and to reproduce that on a press, it needs to be converted to a halftone screen where the dots get smaller and smaller. Feel free to pause this video at any time and read that text. Now here's a little bit deeper. This is about as far as we'll go into the creation of, or what halftone screens are and the difference. Essentially, LPI you can think of as lines per inch, and that's the physical dots on the paper, where PPI is the pixels per inch, which is the pixels on your screen. So in pre-press, they have this like Zen saying or something, you know, pixel on screen becomes dot on paper, right? So the converting the pixels, digital pixels, to physical dots is what pre-press is all about. When you are creating your photographs, you want to have your pixels per inch, your PPI, at 300. Now that's way more than the lines per inch. Our LPI, our physical dots, are only going to be around 150 to 200. And the reason that 300 is the standard for PPI is because it's about twice the standard of the LPI, 150. When you see DPI, dots per inch, that's an old way of saying pixels per inch. A long time ago, people used to say dots per inch, and they meant the dots on their computer screen, but that's not what that means. Dots per inch is how the halftone dots are made, how the LPI is made. So there might be a printer that says it's got 4,800 DPI, dots per inch. You're like, wow, holy cow, that's tons, that's a lot of dots per inch. But you know, commercial printing only does 200 lines per inch. So what is going on? What does that mean? Well, the dots per inch is breaking down those halftone dots into even smaller dots, grids, to create those halftone dots. So in this image down here, you can see that there's LPI, or I'm sorry, PPI here is our pixels. We have our pixels there. And then to create those pixels into LPI, to actually create these halftone dots, the computer makes even smaller grids to define how those dots are made. And it's all these tiny little grids that are the DPI. So when you're looking at a scanner or a printer that has, you know, 4,800 or 3,200 DPI resolution, you're like, holy cow, you know, that's amazing. Well, that's because that's the resolution that it's making to create the halftone dots, the LPI. So I hope you're not getting confused. You don't have to worry about DPI too much. LPI is lines per inch, and that's your physical printing screen. PPI is your pixels per inch, and that's your digital resolution. So that's about as deep as we need to go into resolution at this point. If you work in pre-press, you can go even deeper and learn more of the science of it. Anyways, there you go. We'll see